Okay, good afternoon. This is Barbara Bishop at West Georgia RESA. Thank you all for joining in for our first high school ELA Accessing Georgia Milestones webinar. We will be doing one of these Accessing Georgia Milestone webinars per month, per grade level, and this is September still, technically. So this is the very first one we've had for high school. We are using the following resources in this presentation: the archived Department of Education webinars on the Georgia Milestones, the West Georgia RESA Constructed Response training PowerPoints that we've used before, and external prototype sites that have been suggested for use by West Georgia RESA and or the Department of Education. And in order to house all these materials in a place where we might gain access to them more readily, we've made the website that you see here below at tinyurl.com/GA-milestones-ELA. I'm going to stop my PowerPoint for a moment just to take us to that site so that I may show you just a few things before we begin other website content. So this is the page that we're referring to. Every webinar that we at West Georgia RESA have for milestones is archived here. This is the ELA page only. There is an associated math page as well. If you want to get to the math page or get to this page again, and if you've forgotten how to get to it, you can go simply to our West Georgia RESA main page, and under Services there's a Recorded Archives link, and you can go to the page from there. The PowerPoint that I'm using today, as well as the recording for this webinar from today, will be housed on this site shortly after we are finished. I've also placed on this page some of the newer links that we've been excited to find on the DOE website. One of them is the end of grade content weights for the milestones, the other the end of course content weights for the milestones. And again, we're just talking ELA here today in this webinar. Also, this is the link to the main Georgia DOE's milestone assessment homepage, including the link directly to their Eliciting Evidence of Student Learning webinars for both math and ELA, which are very excellent. And our webinars are not intended in any way to replace that great information out of the DOE, but rather just to supplement and to provide another way for you to access it. We also have some suggested articles that we were given from the DOE. They were listed as resources within the DOE's Eliciting Evidence of Student Learning webinars. So I simply just found them online and linked them here. So these are, again, suggested by the DOE as related specifically to assessment and formative assessment in particular. Now, on the right-hand side of this page are the links to those external either DOE pages from other states or assessment entities that have created either sample items or practice items that are very much like our Georgia milestones. One of them, of course, is our very own Department of Education's Formative Item Bank, soon to be renamed GoFar. And so this is a link to that, sort of a quick link to remind us of the great resources there. Also, the Smarter Balanced and Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness College Careers as the two big assessment entities that for a while we're going to be actually administering and designing all of the Common Core tests. Now a number of states, like our own state of Georgia, have gone a different route. But we have heard that even though our Georgia milestone tests are currently being devised, that these resources still remain very helpful to us. And in fact, we've been told many times that the Georgia milestones test will be PARCC-like that it remains very much like those questions that we have found and still can find on the parkonline.org. So these are just quick links to all those places. We've also been told to look to the NAEP items and to these states in particular who just have organized their own response to constructed response item and second-generation assessment resources. They've organized them in such a way that it's very friendly for folks outside of their state to access. So that was step one of this webinar today, was just to show you where resources live and where they will remain after this webinar. So I'll return now to our PowerPoint. Okay, so our whole purpose of this webinar, even though it's a very short webinar, we do have an important learning target, and that is for us to build our capacity to introduce students to the expectations, format, and content of constructed response questions. We already have a capacity to do this. We already teach in ways that are aligned to Common Core and to second-generation type high expectations and rigorous assessments, but we are just trying to build that capacity as the adults are forever in a position where we might build our capacity to build their capacity. And so I hope that by the end of this PowerPoint, we will be able to determine and script out our next actions to ensure continued preparation towards supporting learners in second-generation assessments. In other words, that we might leave this quick webinar with a to-do list. You know, oh, I need to go ask so-and-so about that, or I need to show this to Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, or I need to look this up, or I need to check out that PowerPoint. But whatever it is that you personally have on your next step list to get you even farther down the line in assisting students in these second-generation assessments. I want to reiterate again that the DOE's new webinar series for the milestones are very excellent, and you can get to them from the DOE page, of course, but also, again, from that website that I showed you earlier with the one with the star on it. And their Assessment for Learning series has 5 different modules, and the first of those are already posted for you to listen to. Within those excellent DOE webinars, they have reminded us in the discussion of how this all aligns not only to the rigors and expectations of college youth career readiness, but to our own TEKS standards. And this is very much in line with having an academically challenging environment, TEKS number 8, as well as using the assessments for learning in those TEKS standards as well. They reminded us that there is a constant process for formative assessment and then to summative assessment in the classroom, that once we have a standard in mind for students, we are assessing their current knowledge, designing instruction based on that, assessing them in formative ways, teaching, and then assessing how that went in the learning, and then providing the feedback that makes it necessary to continue this process over and over. So this slide, I think, is a nice visual for how continuous the formative assessment and instructional design process is and how they go hand in hand. So we're talking about constructed response questions in particular and how we get students to the point where they are more familiar with those. It is not a surprise to any of us that we are now in a position to need to do this, as the federal requirements for Race to the Top stated that we would have high-quality assessments, and we knew that by virtue of Common Core integrating reading, writing, speaking, listening, and research in natural ways, that we also were going to have an assessment system that would consolidate ELA, reading and writing, into a single measure, and that we knew that we would be increasing rigor to align with college and career readiness, and so that's why we are working toward constructed response questions in our assessments. This is just a quick reminder that this was a very necessary change and improvement for our state, as there was a big disconnect between what we were reporting as state measures and what the nation was reporting in similar measures by way of the NAEP. And so it was obvious that our entire assessment system needed to step up its rigor. Many of you already know that there was an ELA pilot for constructed response type open-ended questions, and the students did not fare well. That is not a reflection of their intelligence. It's not a reflection even of the instruction of their teachers. It's simply a reflection of how different that assessment was from what they had gained any sort of familiarity with. So this serious situation that we find ourselves in, where the students are, where the pilot students have demonstrated that they are not ready, and we can extrapolate that to know that our entire population of students are largely going to be unready for this test, not necessarily because of what they know, but because of the test itself and how different that experience is. The good news is that there's a great deal that we can do every day in the classroom to make that kind of assessment more familiar. So just a good definition for us for constructive response questions. Those that are asking the students to apply the knowledge, skills, and critical thinking. These are very real-world, standards-driven performance tasks. They require students to construct answers out of sometimes just a prompt and just a source without the benefit of suggestions or choices. And that, of course, is very different from the cognitive skill of simply identifying what might be correct and in front of you. So we were asked, and this question was posed also in the DOE webinars, why do we think that students are doing so poorly on constructed response questions at this point? And here are some of the reasons why we believe that that might be the case. In some instances, the pilot showed us that students didn't know how to answer the question. They didn't understand the question, or that they provided answers that were more shallow and needed more detail, but probably did not realize that they were providing a shallow response. Many students got off topic, did not have the practice to to remain in that focused space with their constructive response. Many of the students had spelling or handwriting issues that impacted the score. For the most part, it was simply not knowing what was being asked. In fact, we were told that one of the most common responses was, "I don't know what to write," which I'm glad that that's what it said, is because that's something we can begin to solve rather than "I don't know the answer to this question." So instead of writing about what the passage talked about, sometimes students wrote about what they knew because they were perhaps nervous and just wanted to remain in a comfort zone. So they were providing a response, and perhaps they thought that just simply responding was going to be good enough. Whether or not they were on task with the question, we're not sure. But the main idea is the one I have bolted down here, is that we've not yet been in the habit as a state to, in a high-stakes testing situation, have students lift and use an answer, find information, and then construct with that material. Instead, we're in the habit of selection, and so we just have to change our habits. There we go. Okay. So some of the unique features that we know about for the Georgia Milestones is that there will be a selected response questions. We have not done away with multiple choice, as y'all know, that there's no reason to, that those remain valid ways to assess students. We're just balancing that with additional constructive response, extended response, and even technology-enhanced response, which is the fancy way of saying those kind of answers that require some computer usage, whether it be clicking and dragging or highlighting or selecting with the with the radio buttons, etc. We know that there will be on this test both criterion referenced and norm referenced questions, and that is different for us. And it's part of what we need to have in our knowledge base as teachers to know that we're operating in both worlds here with that test. So in other words, we're going to find out concretely through the student responses what kind of alignment we have between the student responses and mastery toward a given standard, but we're also going to get other information, and that's going to be information relative to the performance of other students who take the test. We know also that we no longer have special Georgia grade levels where writing has more emphasis in its summative testing than in other areas. We now have writing at every grade level. So we are keeping the focus of 3, 8, and all the way up into the high school levels, and not just 3, 5, 8, 11. I know that y'all know all of these things. I'm just trying to provide some content that you can refer back to, and hopefully it'll be helpful. One thing we know about the rubrics for these particular writing performance tasks that the students will have is that they will be holistic in the sense that you'll get like an entire, you'll get a number for the entire performance, and there may also be some domain specific. We don't yet have, we have many examples rather from our from the website that I showed you and all those different departments of education and different entities, but it's quite possible that we're in for a different kind of rubric and one where we're being more holistic. Okay, I want to show you this slide. It comes from a colleague of mine. Her name is Dawn Bennett, and she's quite excellent school improvement and a special education specialist. And she has this acronym that I think is very useful, and it's a reminder to kids and also to teachers that constructive response questions can be addressed if you think of RACE, R-A-C-E, with R being a challenge to reword or restate the question, A, to provide a quick answer, C, to go back and cite evidence from the text, and E, to go back and then explain how your evidence supports your answer. And students at differing grade levels can be taught how to use this acronym in different ways. We do have a constructed response organizer for RACE that just simply has a place for the kids to write the prompt, to restate it in their own words, to give a simple answer to the question, then to go back and find the detailed evidence in their citation, and then a reminder of how to go back and flesh that that citation out to show, to justify the different citation selections that they made. So here are just a couple of ideas to go along with this, and many of them are simple, but I do think that that they remain worthwhile ideas. One of them is simply to have students practice restating questions. How did Little Red Riding Hood know the character in the bed was not her grandmother? Well, regardless of how you're going to continue to answer that question, one possible way, one safe way, yes, but one possible way to begin is to flip it around. Little Red Riding Hood knew the character in the bed was not her grandmother because. Now, we know that we are providing the very best instruction when we are differentiating. So we may have gifted readers and writers or capable readers and writers who are well beyond that as a beginning. And when that is the case, we can encourage them to perhaps start this way and then change it, and then maybe even justify why their initial sense is better. You know, what do they gain by not being formulaic? But with other students, this is a very valid way to begin. Also, we would like to suggest that that we practice this restating and this idea of connector sentences by practicing with questions that are not really very literary. For example, what did you do last night that was different from what you typically do? Write an essay in which you use examples from last night and a more typical evening. Well, that is not requiring an analysis of a literary text, but it does have the same format and the same cognitive process as something much more like the literary analysis constructed response questions that students will encounter on the milestones. For example, you could have students come up with their own questions like this, or you could give a student a question like this and then ask them, what would be a typical or an expected or a suggested first sentence. And there are many of them, of course, but having the students practice going from that kind of a prompt question to a first sentence can be very helpful, and it can spark good discussion for students to share their different ways of writing their first sentence. So it could be, last night I had an evening that was not typical, or they could begin by saying, on a typical evening, I usually ... etc. But just having kids get used to going from question to getting a start is helpful. Also, I suggest that we have kids practice coming up with their own Common Core type constructed response questions by asking them to think of a question and then to imagine that there are different sources. So maybe somebody's interested in football, and maybe their question is, why did the Falcons lose the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos? I forgot to go back and look and see if that's even true. I'm sorry, I'm not a football person. I think that they lost to the Denver Broncos. I'm not sure. So why did the Falcons lose the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos? Have the students write that question, and then have the students think about, well, what could be two things that you might read that would have anything to do with this? And how would you word that if you were going to make this into a prompt for an analytical essay? Read and analyze what? Perhaps the article from the AJC, and perhaps something else like a Falcons fan web page, and then get them used to adding those tag remarks that are indeed very Common Core. Support your answer, be sure and cite evidence from both sources. So students can practice coming up with their own response questions, or you could provide them with the question and then in the blanks have them come up with two suggested different sources, or you could just put blanks in like be sure and what, be sure and blank from both sources and see if they can remember cite evidence. For constructed responses, one thing that we like to have just sort of as a little metaphor is to talk about the construction aspect of it. And, if you were going to construct something, what would you need? Well, first of all, you would need some materials, and then you would need something to make those materials stick together. And so we want to talk to students about the materials themselves and then the glue that become like the connector ideas. So what materials can you build with, and how do you hold these materials together? Also, what style are you building in? Are you building a hut? Are you building a skyscraper? Are you building like a little dome? I mean, the different style can dictate what kind of building, quote unquote, you're making. So in that case, the kids would examine the audience and infer the different style. So here's how that might work. You could have students answer a prompt without the sources in front of them, just to see how much of this could you predict would be written even without having the sources nearby. So, for example, why did the Falcons lose the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos? Read and analyze your article from the AJC and the Falcons fan page to support your answer. What are some things that you predict might be in this response, even if you don't have an AJC article or a Falcons fan webpage, even if those are just pretend at this point, what are some words you think might be in this response, and see if the kids can come up with a number of them. Like somebody might have as a response words like according to the fan webpage, or the article of the AJC, the author of the AJC article stated, or the Falcons lost the Super Bowl because, or the main reason was because, or another reason was because, or the fans said that, etc. So we want to get kids used to the idea that they do have some prediction about words that and sentence starters that they might use, and to get them out on the table before they go to the source themselves to look for other content. In the classroom, you can have some students restate a question orally, have others change the question to a statement on like a sentence strip, or have other kids totally like restate the statement on chart paper. Here's just an example. I just think here's an example of some sentence starters that are helpful for kids to know that they have handy. And again, there are many writers who are more capable and do not need a suggested sentence prompt, but for others this might still be very helpful. And so for the kids to come up with these on their own and to make their own like class poster where these might reside, like just helpful sentence starters that are probably going to be in a constructed response. According to the text, the author says, "I know this because this proves," you know, etc. And you can find a lot of these actually on Pinterest or Google if you just look for images of posters that have sentence starters. So one other thing that we wanted to accomplish in this short webinar was to pull one of the constructed response sample items and show where this information comes from and also what you might do with it. So I'm going to take this first one and go directly to that site. This is from the Partnership of the Assessment of Readiness for College Careers. And if you remember months ago, they were at one point in line to be the entity that created our test. As it happens, they're not going to be, but we have heard that this still remains a very viable source of information for us. So I've just taken us to directly to the 10th grade ELA literacy summative assessment performance-based component. And in this particular one, the kids are reading an excerpt from Daedalus and Icarus by Ovid, and then they're reading another passage, which is a poem to a friend whose work has come to triumph. And you can click on either of these and print them out. So this, to a friend whose work has come to triumph, is a short poem. And then this excerpt from Daedalus and Icarus is, this is older poetry, as you might imagine, and it's longer, and it does have that intimidation factor because it's qualitatively complex in that this vocabulary is not in our usual speaking of the day, and also just by having the stanzas numbers, I think visually it's a little intimidating, but you know, that's part of it. This is what we're working with Common Core, is complex text, and we want students to recognize why something is looking intimidating, and then just to be able to call it what it is. Oh, this looks hard because the vocabulary is unfamiliar to me, and also because it's poetry, and also because it's more than one page. But just knowing that that's what's impacting them at that moment can be very helpful. So on this main page, the PARC has provided these two suggested 10th grade appropriate Common Core complexity excerpts, and the students are to read it and then, Yeah. The final part of this sample item is that it says, use what you have learned from reading Daedalus Icarus by Ovid and To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Triumph by Anne Sexton to write an essay that analyzes how Icarus's experience of flying is portrayed differently in the two texts. Develop your essay by providing textual evidence from both texts, and be sure to follow the conventions of standard English. And so that is the task, and it is a literary analysis, and it's comparative, and and it is higher order, and it is rigorous. So that's one reason why I chose this one, is because when I first read it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is very difficult for kids, and it is. But sometimes the more difficult for kids, the more useful it is in the classroom as like a full group activity or a small group activity. So I want to show next that there's another resource, and that is also directly from the park. The second URL that I've listed has the entire set of questions that lead up to that particular writing prompt. And it's very scaffolded, meaning that by the time you address this question 1 and think through it and then move to the next question and the next question, it gets you into a place where it is still not easy, but it's easier to write that prompt. So it's not just a prompt that's thrown there out of nowhere. You, in the course of this particular sample test, the students would have encountered very specific questions, multiple choice questions about particular phrases and lines and meanings, and by the time they've encountered those, they are in better shape to write. So one thing I suggest then is that we use these two sample texts, these very complex texts, but also we use these questions. And I love that this not only has an answer key, this has like an explanation, like, okay, so why is option B correct? It says the correct response is option B because the fact that Daedalus has begun to focus on. So it really gives us as a teacher insight into what they were thinking when they came up with those questions. Also, I have put this URL with it, and this URL is a PowerPoint that comes from the park that further explains those kind of tasks, and in particular the one about Daedalus and Icarus. So it's very useful for teachers to, for one thing, it takes those questions that were in that other document and puts them nicely one per slide so that you could more easily use them in the classroom. But it also has commentary for the teachers and an explanation. It also gives this a look into the technology-enabled aspect of this particular prompt, because the students are supposed to drag and drop into the table 3 supporting details in order to show how that idea is developed. Well, if you don't currently have technology to do that with, or if you opt not to use technology to do that with, you can still, use scissors, or like, you can still either just rewrite them, or I like to use, tear them up or cut them out for that purpose. But this is very useful in the classroom as well. And then I love that this particular school system, and I forgot which school system it is, but when you go to the, this direct URL, it will remind us who this is. But they have analyzed this particular question. And of course, they're doing it through the lens of some of their very specific school system stuff. But if we don't worry about that and instead look at these slides in the middle, they've got a student work sample of a response for this. They've got a high response, a middle response, and a low response. Of course, this is very valuable for, very valuable for student work analysis, either with a group of teachers, just doing some professional learning on all this, or in the classroom. The kids might not yet have the vocabulary to fully explain why one writer has accomplished the prompt better than another, but most students can successfully rank these and say, this one's better than this one, and then and this sentence is the best one that I see on this page, and this is where this particular writer was doing well, and this is where this writer was not accomplishing the task. And with the help of the teacher or in their peer discussions, they can come to use the correct language about why exactly is this a student work sample that has not yet demonstrated the same kind of understanding as this this middle one or this high one. So even if you just take a couple sentences from each of these and talk about the sentences, I think that would be very valuable. My second slide here is just a simple T-chart for Icarus's experience of flying. Since that is, in fact, what it is that we're comparing, kids could be given a T-chart like this, I would say given the short poem first by Sexton, and have them work in groups to just come up with some words and phrases that they find directly from the text that are describing the experience of flying, and maybe that's all they do with that day. And they put it up, and then the next day they're given this back, and they're told, all right, now there's another writer who also described Icarus's experience of flying. Let's look at that text, and now let's just make side-by-side comparisons of how the two different authors are dealing with that same experience. And then maybe that's all they do with that for that day. And maybe the next day we start taking some of the words that we've come up with in our groups to describe the experiences of flying from this poem, and start putting them together into a comparative sentence. And then maybe we take those sentences and other sentence starters that we expect to find, from our perhaps our poster on the wall or whatever, and maybe we physically construct a class response to this. There's so many different ways that you can work with something like this, but I think the value of it is just to create an experience where the students realize, look what you just did. You just had this very intimidating Common Core constructive response prompt. Use what you've learned from reading Daedalus and Icarus by Ovid and Choose Frenzy's Work of Come of Tyrants by Anne Sexton. Write an essay that analyzes how Icarus' experience of flying is portrayed differently in two texts. Develop your essay by providing textual evidence from both texts. Be sure to follow the conventions of standard English. I mean, it sounds like, oh, wow, I don't know. But essentially, they have done it, if they have, with your help, looked at one piece at a time and found some evidence of the experience, thought about how they were different, taken those details and put them into sentences, including sentences that they expected to have, even without looking at the prompt. And I think the more times kids can feel like, wow, look what I just did. I did it. I had this terrible, I say terrible, I'm sorry. I have this prompt. It looks very, very intimidating, but yet the experience is now that I've accomplished that. I got that one. And if this is something that is intentionally part of the exposure and routine of the classroom, over the course of the month, then when students are presented with these kind of questions, at least the familiarity will be increased, at least the confidence will be increased, and perhaps even some of the skills for how to get behind it and how to get started. So I'm asking now, I've got my own little list of things that I need to go off and do now as I continue to try to get better at helping students towards these kind of prompts and this new expectation of second-generation assessments. But what are your own actions? What do you feel like you should do next? Is there some term you want to look up? Is there somebody you want to talk to? Did this remind you of a resource you have that you had forgotten about? Or do you want to investigate some of the specific links on here? Or do you want to start a dialogue with some of your colleagues about certain aspects of instruction? There's a number of things, and you know best what your next step should be. And I look forward to doing this again next month at the high school level and middle and elementary, where our goal will be to come up with a few more ideas and each time to examine a different specific sample item and resources that might go along with it. This is a new thing for us, and we want it to be useful. So if you have some ideas for how we might improve this, or if you want to evaluate this session, then please feel free to do that. There's the link directly to the survey, and then there's also my email address if you'd like to contact me. And I am going to open this up now for any questions. Let's see if y'all have any questions. Let me unmute here. Do y'all have any questions, or is there anything I can help you with? I'm going to add this PowerPoint and also the recording. It'll take a little while for the recording this afternoon to render and become like a link, but in just a bit it will be on that page. I appreciate your listening and also appreciate any feedback you'd like to share. Good luck with the work you do, and let me know if I can help. Thank you. Bye.